Leaving the beautiful fall weather of Illinois, it was off to visit Spain and Portugal. After a long overnight flight, we landed in Madrid, Spain, anxious for what lay ahead of us in the next 14 days. After checking in a hotel, it was off to sightsee. First stop, the Plaza Mayor, Madrid's main square. From there, it was off to find one of the many street markets. We found one of Madrid's oldest and most iconic street markets. Every Sunday at 9 a.m., hundreds of stalls are set up in this neighborhood, filling the street with life and bustle. It's a must for tourists and locals alike, who browse through the new and the second-hand clothes, costume jewelry, decorative items, souvenirs of Madrid, prints, and drawings. At noon, it's almost impossible to walk down the street. Haggling is the norm, as are the shouts of the vendors announcing their best deals. Back at our hotel, we checked the view from our window. It was not what we expected to see. Instead of a great view of the beautiful buildings of Madrid, we found out how the other side of the tracks lived. It was a real eye-opener. We met the rest of our tour group and headed out for our afternoon Madrid city tour. We noticed several of the different types of buildings and their unusual paintings. Our first stop was at the Royal Palace. It is one of the top tourist attractions in Madrid. It is the official residence for the royal family, now used mainly for ceremonial and public functions. The staircase isn't just grand that screams opulence, but it's laden with interesting artworks. From the landing to the walls and to the ceiling, art masterpieces are enshrined. The interior of the palace is notable for its wealth of art and the use of many different types of fine materials in the construction and the decoration of its rooms. They are but reminders of the influence, power, and grandeur of the Spanish monarchy. The Royal Palace of Madrid is open to the public as a museum of the buildings and the country's history. The palace has 1,450,000 square feet of floor space and contains 3,418 rooms. It is the largest royal palace in Europe by floor area. We toured several more rooms but did not have enough time to see all of the 3,000 plus. It was time to continue our city tour of Madrid. We passed the Sibylla's Fountain, which depicts the Roman goddess symbol of the earth, agriculture, and fertility, atop a chariot drawn by two lions. As we continued, we passed several more of the beautiful buildings of Madrid. The center of the Plaza de Orient is the large 9-ton bronze equestrian statue of King Philip IV on a rearing horse. The rear section of the horse was solid bronze. The top half was hollow to keep it from falling over. After a long, busy day of touring Madrid, we decided to relax a while and enjoy a cool drink at one of the many sidewalk cafes. The next adventure was the old town of Segovia. It is located in the center of Spain, 56 miles northwest of Madrid. The center is crowded together on the rocky bluff delineated by the confluence of two rivers. Moors, Christians, and Jews coexisted for a long period of time in the medieval city and worked together during the 16th century manufacturing boom. The evidence of this cultural process can be seen in the large number of outstanding monuments in the city, among which the Roman aqueduct stands out. Other important monuments can be found in the area. The Alcazar began around the 11th century, several Romanesque churches, noble palaces from the 15th and 16th centuries, and the 16th century Gothic cathedral, the last to be built in Spain in this style. It took less than 52 years to complete. Dozens of spires of the impressive Segovia Cathedral all direct the eyes heavenward. The elegant sand-colored cathedral is an awe-inspiring sight to look upon. The bell tower is the building's highest point, reaching nearly 300 feet to the spire. The Alcazar of Segovia is particularly special in that it was built upon a large rock promontory, which is shaped rather like the bow of a ship. The Alcazar was built as a fortress, and it was later used as a royal palace, royal artillery college, state prison, and military museum. The construction of the Alcazar was started in the year 1120. After climbing the 156 crooked steps to the top of the Tower of Juan II, we were greeted with beautiful views across the Spanish countryside. Kay decided she just couldn't go any further until she had a short rest. As we wandered around the old Jewish quarters on our way to the Roman aqueduct, we came across the San Milan Church. It was built in the 1100s and is one of the oldest churches in Segovia. Of course, we had to take advantage of another short rest stop before continuing. The Roman aqueduct of Segovia, probably built around 50 BC, is remarkably well preserved. This impressive construction, with its 2 tiers of arches, forms part of the magnificent setting of the historic city of Segovia. It is an enormous construction of masonry, half-mile in length, comprised of 166 stone arches on granite ashlars, set in neither cement nor mortar. At the lowest point of the valley, the aqueduct stands at a height of 93 feet above the ground. It was in use until the middle of the 19th century. As we were leaving the area, there were a couple of local ladies peddling their handmade tablecloths. Our next stop was the city of Avila. The old city is surrounded by imposing walls comprising 8 monumental gates, 88 watchtowers, and more than 2,500 turrets. It is one of the best preserved medieval bastions in Spain. In winter, when the icy winds whistle in off the plains, the old city huddles behind the high stone walls as if seeking protection from the harsh Castilian climate. Inside the perfectly preserved walls of Avila, visitors are transported to a world where time seems to have stood still. The ancient ramparts guard many historic attractions: Romanesque churches, medieval convents, and the Renaissance palaces. The wealth of exceptional monuments and the old world ambience makes Avila one of the most interesting cities in Spain. Throughout the early medieval period, Avila alternated between the Moorish and Christian rule. Many noble families settled here beginning in the 11th century. With its numerous aristocratic palaces, the town became known as Avila de los Caballeros. However, Avila's real heyday was in the 16th century, when the mystical spirit of Santa Teresa de Jesus made it an important pilgrimage destination. Equally inspiring is the natural setting of the town stands on a high plateau sheltered by the rolling hills of the Sierra Gordos Mountains. After the Christian reconquest of Avila, the ramparts became an important line of defense against the Moors. A massive circuit of walls was built between 1090 and 1099, with a rectangular shape following the circumference of the town. The circuit extends more than a mile and a half. The imposing stone wall was ideally designed to defend the city from attacks. It features an average height of 40 feet along the crenellated towers and the round turrets every 65 feet for observing the oncoming invaders. Outside the town walls, the Basilica of St. Vincent is Avila's most important church after the cathedral. High atop one of the buildings, we notice two very large stork's nests. Visiting the city of Salamanca feels like strolling through an open-air museum with magnificent historic monuments on display. Presiding over the town from a commanding hilltop location, the new cathedral is a monumental building that outshines the old cathedral in size and Gothic grandeur, although not in history. The new cathedral was begun in the early 16th century and completed in the 18th century, taking 2 centuries to complete. The building displays a combination of architectural elements, from the hallowed halls of the ancient university to the glorious cathedrals and soul-inspiring convents. Salamanca takes a tourist on a journey back in time. This celebrated university town has been famous since the Middle Ages, when it drew students from all over Europe, and it still has a youthful energy. Wander around the old cobblestone streets and quiet squares to discover the rich heritage, while following the footsteps of Spain's greatest philosophers, scientists, writers, and artists. This beautiful public square in the heart of Salamanca is considered one of the grandest plazas in Spain. Historically, this spacious square of the Plaza Mayor has served as a setting for ceremonial occasions as well as bullfights until the 19th century. Many cafes and restaurants are found around the arcade. Traveling into Portugal, our lunch stop for the day was in Coimbra. Coimbra is like taking a journey through history. This ancient city was at the forefront of the Roman Empire more than 2,000 years ago and declared the first capital of the new Kingdom of Portugal in the 12th century. Coimbra, Portugal is the home to the oldest university in Europe and now a thriving modern city. Our time schedule did not allow us any time to explore any further, but we did discover the public restrooms are located under the street, which we just had to investigate. While continuing on our way to Lisbon, we stopped at the Batalha Monastery, one of Europe's greatest Gothic masterpieces. The exterior possesses innumerable pinnacles, buttresses, and open-work balustrades above Gothic and flamboyant windows. Batalha Monastery is not just a monastery. It is a monument to the unity of Portugal, a union between Portugal and England, an expression of the power and, above all, a wonderful monument of architecture and art. It took over a century to build this amazing monastery, which had 7 kings to oversee the construction. A walk through the cloisters gave us the opportunity to admire more of the beautiful architecture. The Praça de Comércio is the largest of Lisbon's mighty plazas that is positioned on the edge of the Tagus estuary. In ancient times, this location was where traders would sell their foreign wares and financiers would fund perilous expeditions to the far reaches of the known world. As a tourist attraction, the plaza is the grandest of Lisbon's squares, with traditional painted buildings lining three sides and a magnificent statue of King Jose I positioned in the center. The plaza was constructed in 1755 after the great earthquake of Lisbon destroyed the entire district. Before the earthquake, the most important royal palace complex was situated on this site, but this was totally destroyed by the tsunami that preceded the earthquake. Off in the distance we could see the statue of Christ the Redeemer. It is one of Lisbon's most iconic and prominent landmarks that stands on the southern bank of the river Tagus. From the high pedestal, the statue of Christ has his arms outstretched as if in emotion blessing Lisbon. Alfama is the oldest district of Lisbon, and it is a delightful maze of narrow streets which lead up from the Tajo estuary uphill to the castle. Contained within this ancient district, there are some of Lisbon's most historically important buildings. Prior to the 13th century, Alfama was a district outside the city walls, home to the capital's poorest residents. This tough and deprived reputation continued as Lisbon expanded, and Alfama became home to the dock workers and the sailors. The Alfama district is an area of steep hills and narrow streets, and there is very limited public transportation. The only way to explore Alfama is on foot. Today, Alfama has shrugged off its grim status and become a young, trendy, and fashionable area of Lisbon. But fortunately, the area has lost none of its ancient charm. We wandered the narrow streets and alleyways, taking in all the sights and culture that Alfama had to offer. We were amazed at some of the sights we witnessed, especially the vendors with their merchandise set right out on the streets, the markets with their open food displayed, and the conditions there were to do their washing. Also, the way they hung their clothes and sheets out to their windows to dry. We saw a couple little old ladies hanging out their windows were taking care of their laundry the best way they could. Number 28 tram is a classic tram that rattles and screeches through the narrow streets of Lisbon, and no visit is complete without a ride on one of these quaint trams. In any other city, the 1930 trams would be in an exhibit in a museum, but in Lisbon they are an integral part of the public transportation network. Our last stop for our tour was at one of Lisbon's most visited sites, the Coaches Museum. It has the largest and most valuable collection of this type in the world. It illustrates the ostentation and staggering wealth of the old Portuguese elite. Built in 1515 as a fortress to guard the entrance to Lisbon harbor, the Belém Tower was the starting point for many of the voyages of discovery, and for the sailors it was their last sight of their homeland. The Discoveries Monument, it is an imposing, iconic monument located on the bank of the river Tagus. The structure is dedicated to the adventurers and explorers who helped establish Portugal as a 14th century superpower. The 170-foot tall monument dominates the shoreline and manages to combine both grandeur with fine carved details. From a distance, the harsh and powerful style monument seems slightly out of place in the pleasant and historic Belém district, but by drawing closer it becomes apparent that it is rightly positioned by celebrating the achievements of Belém and the Portuguese. The Lisbon Aqueduct was built in the 18th century and it continued to supply water until 1967. It runs across the valley for over 8.5 miles and at its highest point is over 213 feet. On our way to Sintra, traveling west out of Lisbon, we passed several houses cascading down the hillside as if to fall any moment. The spectacular National Palace of Sintra stands in the heart of the old town and is part of the cultural landscape of Sintra. Built in the 14th century on the site once occupied by a Moorish castle, the palace is immediately discernible by its two conical chimneys, a distinguishing feature and the hallmark of Sintra itself. Next stop was at the delightful Portuguese fishing village of Caxias. It is situated on the western edge of the beautiful Lisbon coastline and is the region's most popular holiday destination. Historically, the town was a favorite with the Portuguese nobility, and today the town is an elegant blend of grand 19th century architecture, traditional Portuguese charm, and outstanding tourist facilities. The charming old town center of Caxias contains a range of interesting tourist attractions and monuments, while the surrounding coastline offers beaches to relax on and pleasant hiking routes. We enjoyed a stroll around the coastline where we watched the old Portuguese fishermen in their colorful fishing boats work on restoring their nets for their next fishing trip. We stopped at the Francisca Winery and Bottling Works for a tour of their facility, enjoy a little wine tasting. The facility was very impressive, very large, and very modern. The Francisca wines consist of 34 different brands. They produce over 12 million bottles. They export 80% of their production to 70 different countries. They have 2.5 square miles of vineyards in this location. The company was founded in 1834, is family owned and currently in the 7th generation. We were able to tour the bottling area, the cask room where rows and rows of wine casks are kept, the tasting area, and of course, the wine shop. Some of the wines are fermented in large clay pots, which I had to demonstrate their size with a little bit of silliness. As we traveled on, the vastness of the landscape was dotted with cork, oak, and olive trees that withstand time. We were able to get a close-up look at one of the olive trees that was ready to be picked, while 3 of the olive pickers took a break to pose for pictures. Around the hills, low, whitewashed houses stand on small knolls. Castles evoke battles and conquest, and the yards and gardens are witness to the Arab influences which have shaped the people and nature. Here you may find a walled town, small whitewashed houses, or castles around every turn. And even a windmill. Our lunch stop for the day was a roadside stand. We found a few chairs and a nice spot in the shade to enjoy the sandwiches and, of course, some Portuguese wine. Just like anywhere else, a line formed for the facilities before returning to the bus to continue our journey. Seville, one of Spain's most colorful cities, is the capital of southern Spain's Andalusia region. It's famous for its flamenco dancing. Major landmarks include the cathedral and its Giralta Tower with its intricate Moorish decorations, and the 12th century Alcazar Castle complex, built during the Moorish dynasty. It was once a Moorish royal palace. The Alcazar was originally the medieval fortress of Moorish rulers and later of the Christian kings. The palace was built in the 10th century. The Christian reconquest took place in the 1360s. The elegant courtyard was built between 1369 and 1379 and exemplifies Islamic architecture with magnificent arches featuring open arabesque work above 52 marble columns. In addition, Andalusian-style courtyards, decorative pools, and refreshing fountains are the centerpieces of the landscaping. We wandered through many rooms admiring all of the exquisite tile works. Plaza de España is a semicircle brick building, Renaissance Neo-Moorish in style, with a tower at either end, tall enough to be visible around the city. These towers are major landmarks. In front of the building, following the curve of its facade, is a 500-meter canal crossed by 4 bridges, and in the center of it all is the plaza itself. This massive building is one of Seville's most impressive for its sheer scale and grandeur. With some of the free time, we wandered through some of the narrow streets and alleyways, observing the lifestyle of the local people. At one time, Cordoba was one of the largest cities in Europe. It has a long and distinguished history, founded by the Romans due to its strategic importance as the highest navigable point in the river. It became a port city of great importance, used for shipping Spanish olive oil, wine, and wheat back to ancient Rome. The Romans built the mighty bridge crossing the river. The Moors added the Tower of La Calahorra at the south end of the Roman bridge during their reign. But Cordoba's hour of greatest glory was when it became the capital of the Moorish kingdom, and this was when work began on the Great Mosque. After several centuries of additions and enlargements, it became the largest of all of Islam. As one of the crowning architectural achievements of the Moors, it still stands today. It is the second most famous structure in Spain, remaining from the days of the Moorish occupation. Built during the 8th century, it covers 6 acres with over 800 pillars supporting red and white striped arches. When the city was reconquered by the Christians in 1236, the new rulers of the city were so awed by its beauty that they left it standing, building their cathedral in the midst of its rows of arches and columns and creating the extraordinary church mosque we see today. The Alcazar of Cordoba, with its thick defensive walls, served both as a fortress and a palace, and is a perfect illustration of the development of the Cordobian architecture through the ages. The entire fortress is encircled by massive walls with 4 towers. However, the major attraction of the royal fortress are the magnificent backyard gardens. Beautiful fountains and well-cut hedges give evidence to advanced Moorish horticultural experience, which was taken over by their Christian followers. Cordoba's historic downtown area has preserved its enchanting panache over the centuries. The former Jewish quarter harbors treasures of Moorish architecture and is home to some of the most spectacular monuments in town. Beyond the hustle and bustle, there are exaggerated corners, narrow winding alleyways, making a stroll worthwhile. There we found many lovely whitewashed houses and magnificent balconies and courtyards overflowing with colorful blooms. We wandered around the area with its typical Andalusian maze of alleyways. It is the most distinguished and enchanting area in town. Granada is a city in southern Spain's Andalusia region, in the foothills of the snow-capped Sierra Nevada mountains. It's known for grand examples of medieval architecture dating to the Moorish occupation, especially the Alhambra. This sprawling hilltop fortress complex encompasses royal palaces, serene patios and reflecting pools, as well as the fountains and orchards of the general life gardens. The Alhambra is Granada's and Europe's love letter to Moorish culture, a place where fountains trickle, leaves rustle, and ancient spirits seem to mysteriously linger. Part palace, part fort, part World Heritage Site, part lesson in medieval architecture, the Alhambra has long enchanted a never-ending line of expectant visitors. As a historic monument, it is unlikely it will ever be surpassed. At the front of the fortress and closest to and facing town, the Alcazaba, otherwise known as the Citadel, is far less preserved than the rest of the Alhambra. Walking through the weather-worn walls feels like stepping back in time. Climb the foremost tower and you can enjoy a view of the Alcazaba, Granada, and the Sierra Nevada in the distance. The Alhambra is a vision right from the Arabian Nights. This combination of 9th century Alcazab and the 13th century for the Moorish rulers of Spain provide the most complete and beautiful example of superb Muslim architecture outside the Arab world, and give a very realistic experience to the glories of this epoch. Throughout the intricate decorations, mosaics, slender columns, fountains, and grassy pools provide special pleasure. The centerpiece of the courtyard of the lions is a fountain that channeled water through the mouths of 12 marble lions. It dates back from the 11th century. The courtyard layout demonstrates the complexity of Islamic geometric design. The varied columns are placed in such a way that they are symmetrical on numerous axes. The stucco work, too, hits an apex here, almost lace-like detail. One of the most beautiful and impressive of all the rooms in the Alhambra had a ceiling carved from a single piece of stone over what must have taken many stiff-necked artisans centuries. The carved wood screens in the upper level enabled women to peer down from the hallways above without being seen. Granada's breathtaking cathedral was built in the early 16th century, and despite the fact that it was never completed, it is still a Gothic Renaissance masterpiece. We saw paintings by famed artists as well as carvings of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella kneeling in prayer. The nearby Royal Chapel, commissioned by the King and Queen as their mausoleum, is built in the flamboyant Isabelline style and was completed in 1517. We viewed the marble monuments that mark their final resting place. The guide delved into the history behind both the cathedral and the chapel as he discussed the reasons for each monument to be built. We heard about the political and religious ideologies that defined the symbols and structure of each. We heard about the lives, the artists, and the politicians who influenced the structures and analyzed the artwork and iconographic that set them apart. Way too much information for us to take in and remember. The next morning, our bus climbed into the mountainous countryside, dotted with palm trees, orange and lemon groves, and vineyards. We drove along the undulating road, skirting the mountains, and taking in some of the local color scenery as we passed. We stopped for a while to see the palm forest at Elche. Today, over 200,000 officially protected palm trees in the city lend it to somewhat an exotic air. These palms are evident on every street corner, and it can be especially enjoyed in the well-tended city park. We arrived in Valencia in time for a short city tour. Valencia, Spain's third largest city, has long been an important port city, agricultural and industrial center. It lies on Spain's southeastern coast where the Turia River meets the Mediterranean Sea. Thanks to its location, Valencia has historically been Spain's Mediterranean port, and the fine sand and clean water, the vastness of the sea, and the closeness of the coastal mountains make Valencia's coast uniquely attractive. Toledo is one of the Spanish cities with the greatest wealth of monuments. Known as the City of Three Cultures because Christians, Arabs, and Jews lived together there for centuries, behind its walls, Toledo preserves an artistic and cultural legacy in the form of churches, palaces, fortresses, mosques, and synagogue. The great diversity of artistic styles makes the Old Quarter a real open-air museum. Standing watch over the city, the Alcazar has a commanding presence on its hilltop location. This ancient Moorish fortress, built on the site of an earlier Roman fort, was later renovated by the Christian kings. The imposing facade has a square style. During the Spanish Civil War, the Alcazar was used as a nationalist garrison, and it's considered as a monument to the heroism of Franco's supporters. The Alcazar has been restored and now houses an army museum with excellent exhibits about the Civil War. Behind its daunting medieval walls, a labyrinth of winding pedestrian streets, are some of the most important historical landmarks in the country. Magnificent old buildings and quiet cobblestone streets whisper the legacy of the past. We wandered the atmospheric narrow lanes, relaxed in quiet courtyards, and visited artisan shops tucked away in little alleys. Toledo is a magic place, probably one of the most spectacular cities in the world. The buildings and the winding streets contained within the old city walls hold hundreds of years of history, and the river Tajo runs alongside the walls, adds charm to its beauty. One last monument before heading back home after 14 wonderful days soaking in all the marvelous sights around Spain and Portugal. It was the El Escorial Monastery, with its beautiful gardens, a historic residence of the King of Spain located in the outskirts of Madrid. Construction lasted 21 years, from 1563 to 1584. At the time, it was the largest building in the world. One of the most outstanding rooms was the library, which contains over 45,000 books.